Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the future. My name is Zach Gardner, and I'm taking a little bit of a break from my normal video cast. Generative AI is probably going to come up in this conversation in some way, shape, or form because, let's be honest, it's 2024. Generative AI comes up in every conversation that we have. This video cast, though, is more geared towards the next generation of technical leaders. These are people that they might be high school seniors, they may be seniors in college, they may even be seniors in terms of age, but junior in heart. These are people that really want to take the next step with their career. Maybe they've been developing for some time and they aren't sure. Do they want to go down the staff engineer level? Do they want to go down the architect level? Do they want to go down the manager level and put on a suit and be the bane of every developer's existence? I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I'm talking with a group of people from a bunch of different disciplines that might. Today with me on the program, someone I met virtually and through a interesting series of circumstances, I realized lives in the same town that I do. Isn't that weird how that happens? We meet online. I have Matt Menzenski with me today. He's the principal data engineer at PayIt. Matt, how's it going? What's going on?
It's going really well, Zach. How are you doing?
Can't complain. I cannot complain. And my disclaimer that I do in all the programs that I do, I think they could write this on my tombstone because I've said it that many times. All the views and opinions expressed in this program are the views and opinions of the participants and do not reflect their employer, do not reflect their trade organizations, do not reflect any conferences that they submitted presentations to, do not reflect any loyalty cards that they may have. I don't know if you have a Kohl's card, but you know what? Kohl's, we're not talking about you today. This is just two dudes talking. We're just having a good time. That's all. So let's get us started off with maybe give the audience a background on you. Where'd you come from? What's your history like? How did you get into development in the first place? You have a really interesting story that I really enjoyed, and I think other people will too.
Yeah, so my story is a little convoluted, a little circuitous. I I grew up in upstate New York, and I got really into languages in high school, human languages. And actually, for a while, I was even doing constructed languages. I was that kind of kid. Uh, but I got in my head that I wanted to study linguistics in college. My grades were not to the point where I could get into all of the linguistics programs I applied to. I think I applied to 6 colleges and got into one, and it wasn't one that I actually wanted to go to. So I decided to go to community college instead. And I did 2 years of community college in upstate New York, got my associate's degree, had a very good experience at community college. My community college happened to offer Russian. And so I did my associate's degree in social science, thinking that that was going to be a good springboard into linguistics. And I took Russian for the heck of it because it was there. My family background, as you might guess by my last name, is Polish. My dad knows a little Polish. His parents were fluent. And I was like, I found some teach yourself Polish books in my basement when I was a kid, and I was curious about it. And so seeing Russian, I was like, oh, that's pretty close to Polish, right? I'll take that. That'll be interesting. It actually was super awesome. I really, really enjoyed the class, had a great teacher, and really learned a lot. I also was working as a barista doing coffee at the time and got really into coffee. And I did barista competitions. I did latte art competitions, like the whole shebang, and got to the point where that was sort of my compelling interest. And I was like, you know what? I was interested in languages, but coffee's what's got me right now. I'm going to actually pursue a career in coffee. So I did a 90-degree turn, and the community college I was at had a privileged sort of transfer relationship with Cornell University, which is actually where my parents work, where I'm from, is Ithaca, New York. And so I transferred to Cornell into a international agriculture and rural development program, thinking I'm going to work in coffee and, go visit Colombia all the time and do all these things. And turns out that to actually do that degree, you really need a background in farming science that I didn't have because my associate's degree was in sociology. And so I crashed and burned really hard and withdrew from Cornell with my tail between my legs. And I took a couple years off and actually continued working in coffee. I was working as a professional coffee roaster for a time, and started to really feel like, I had really been so into linguistics and was like convinced that I was going to study it and make a career out of it. And I like just did this hard pivot into agriculture, and like I feel like I missed the boat on the linguistics thing. I regret not pursuing linguistics. And so I reapplied to some linguistics programs and got accepted to a couple. And one of the ones that accepted me was University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And so I was like, I'm getting out of New York. I'm going across the country. And I transferred out to the University of New Mexico, and I did a double major there in linguistics and Russian. And it was great. Like I was attending school and not working, and I could just like throw myself entirely into learning everything about everything. And one of the things that I was learning about was programming. The professor that I studied under most at University of New Mexico is a professor named Bill Croft, who writes a lot in functional linguistics, really data-driven approaches to linguistics, like corpus linguistics. And Russian, it's possible to do really good data-driven analyses with Russian. There's good data out there. But it's something where you sort of need to have some technical ability to access it. There's a website called the Russian National Corpus where you can actually extract like hand annotated Russian text. So you can do analyses around when does this word get used versus this word? Are the contexts meaningfully different, et cetera? And I sort of learned Python, a little bit of R first, and then Python to get and analyze linguistics data. So I did an undergraduate honors thesis, which like I was very proud of at the time, and then I've become less proud of, but actually I've become more proud of again because I still see people like referencing it online, which is like really satisfying. It's happened like 2 or 3 times. But it's just a little, sort of simple statistical analysis around some Russian verbal prefixes, and is it statistically significant? Are they used in a significant way in certain contexts? And so I wrote this honors thesis, did a little bit of programming to be able to get the data and analyze the data and tell the story of, yes, this is statistically significant. And then I graduated, and I wanted to continue to pursue Russian and Slavic linguistics. Specifically, I had gotten really into this sort of functional idea with language, and it's a less common approach for linguistics, especially within Slavic linguistics. If you want to study Russian linguistics, 90% of programs that are out there are very formalist. So it's like the classic sort of Chomsky syntax trees. Is this sentence grammatical for you? And you think about like, oh, I could say it in this circumstance. And the functional approach, which is sort of like show me the data about what people are actually saying, like it's less important how you perceive it in the foreground. It's like more meaningful what you're actually producing without thinking about it so much. That approach to linguistics that's really data driven is much less common. And so my options coming out of this bachelor's degree were basically, if I wanted to do functional approaches to Russian linguistics, I could go to University of Kansas and study with Steve Dickey, or I could go to University of Tromsø in Norway and study with Lori Yonda. And Norway is really far away, really expensive. So I came to Kansas. And Kansas was actually really, really good for me. I had a really good time in grad school. I did my master's in Russian. Technically, my master's is in Slavic languages and literatures. And I began the PhD in Slavic linguistics. I completed 1 year of PhD coursework, and then I dropped out. The programming was something that I continued to really sort of lean on. In your first semester in the graduate program, you take this course that's basically like, I think it's even just called Introduction to Graduate Studies, but it's like the students in the Russian department and the German department and the French department all kind of came together, and you learn how to be a grad student. And one of the things you do is like, you analyze novels, right? Because these are literature departments. And I was like, well, I'm a linguistics student. I don't want to write a literature analysis. I want to like do linguistics research. And they were like, Matt, do whatever you want. Just, try to meet the letter of the assignment. And so I was doing like statistical analyses of Russian novels, because many of them are in the public domain. You can get the total text online, and you can do like sentiment analysis and War and Peace, and that's the kind of thing that I was doing. And I would look for opportunities to sort of flex my programming ability and to do new things. And um, I taught my first year. I was on fellowship my second year, and I didn't have to teach. And then my third year, I actually worked as a graduate assistant for a professor of linguistic anthropology, writing software for her in Python. And she worked with Uyghur and other sort of Turkic languages of Inner Asia. She has a corpus called IAIA, IAIA, interactive analysis of Inner Asian languages. I forget specifically what the acronym stands for, but Uyghur is a language that has 3 official writing systems: the Latin alphabet, the Cyrillic alphabet, and the Arabic alphabet. And so a lot of what I did was write Python tooling to be able to transliterate from one to another. So she could have, fieldwork notes using one writing system, and I could sort of help programmatically load that into this corpus format. And that was really fun. And it was a lot more fun to write code to help other people do what they needed to do than it was to do my own linguistics research. To the point where I was prioritizing the enabling of other people over sort of my own research aims. And it got to the point where I was like, you know what? I want to pursue programming as a career and not linguistics, because when you talk about being in a minor subfield of Slavic linguistics, which is a very minor subfield, in a good year worldwide, there might be 2 tenure track job openings in Slavic linguistics. The job market is awful. It's awful for academics in general. And it's really, really hard in a small subfield like this one. And at the time, KU was sort of consolidating language programs, and I was watching the Slavic department become absorbed into this school of languages, and had a lot of concerns about trying to make a living in the Slavic linguistics field. But, programming, job market's good, right? And I was also sort of putting down some roots. I met my now wife in grad school at KU, and she was in the Russian department, and she actually got a job in Kansas City, working for a nonprofit doing essentially she's not a licensed social worker, but essentially doing social work with older Russian speaking adults, helping them navigate the benefits system and apply for different kinds of financial aid and benefits that they're eligible for, and helping them understand what benefits they're eligible for through things like Holocaust survivor status, et cetera. And so it's kind of just more and more coming around to the idea of can I just get a job as a programmer in Kansas City or in Lawrence? And so I had applied to some I had applied to some positions for things like entry-level engineers at Cerner, et cetera, and wasn't getting a lot of interest. And the spring break of my last semester at KU, this would have been March 2016, I found out about a nonprofit called Launch Code that was holding an event at Union Station called Launch Your Career Day. And Launch Code is a nonprofit that was new in Kansas City at the time, that they sort of help people with non-traditional backgrounds find positions in tech, which sounded right up my alley. And so I went to this Launch Your Career Day with some pet projects I had built following some online tutorials, et cetera. And they do mock interviews. And I sat down and sort of showed the interviewer, these are some of the things I've built, and this is what I'm interested in doing. And a day or two later, they said, hey, we'd love to just start shopping you out for apprenticeships. Here's this company called PayIt that's looking for apprentices. Do you want to interview with them? And I was like, sure. And I interviewed with PayIt. I interviewed specifically with Richard Garby, who at the time was founding architect. Currently, he is a distinguished engineer. And it's one of the things that really struck me. I enjoyed the interview. I was offered the apprenticeship, and I took it. But one of the things that came up in that conversation was that Richard's undergraduate degree was in violin performance. And I thought to myself, oh, this is really cool. Here's a company that understands non-traditional backgrounds and has no challenge with that. That was part of the reason that I was interested to accept the offer. And I did the apprenticeship for the 90-day sort of trial period, and then PayIt made a full-time offer, and I accepted it. And almost 8 years later, still here. I was a software engineer, and then I was a software engineer team lead. for a while, and then we created a management layer, and I was one of the first cohort of software engineering managers, and then senior software engineering manager, and most recently transitioning back to an individual contributor as a principal data engineer. But I haven't gotten tired of it, I guess.
Mhm.
It's every single day I'm learning new things, and that just like I can't imagine doing anything else. All the other stuff that I've done in my life was like fine, but having kind of found software development as a career, it's like this is a good spot for me to
Mhm.
just always be doing the new,
Yep. Yeah. You never wake up bored. I think we can
No.
say that for sure. I didn't know. I'm surprised this didn't come up when we were doing the intake that you were into coffee roasting. I have a coffee roaster sitting like about 100 feet that way. What's your
I have
favorite
a, I have
bean?
I have an espresso tattoo I could show you. Um, I I tend to go most for the East African coffees, like a really bright kind of red fruit Kenya. That's my happy cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, really
so I
lightly roasted, fruity Ethiopians are mine. I've never had a
mhm.
bad Ethiopian. It has flavors that coffee should not be legally allowed to have. It's like mind
See,
blowing.
I think to an extent I'm biased against some of the Ethiopian coffees from having roasted
Mm,
them for so long because they're hard to roast because they're really small.
small.
And so I was roasting on an air roaster, and so they behave differently. And it was like if you didn't get it just right, they would like, kind of blow out and roast too quickly or roast too
Hmm.
slowly and you couldn't get it back. And
Hmm.
the Kenyas are like sort of nice and larger and like tend to be more perfectly round and they roast better on the air roasters.
Yeah. Well,
But
I love a challenge. Maybe that's why I enjoy, a little bit of masochism. So, um, you've gone through and very interesting background, by the way. There were a lot of things in there that I didn't know that I found were illuminating. I'm curious, just as kind of nerd to nerd, for those of you that are listening, Matt's wearing not just one piece of Kubernetes swag, but two pieces of Kubernetes swag. That is two more than the average participant of this program. I'm curious if you could talk to me about maybe some of the things that are unique to your industry. Public sector software is what, PayIt sort of known for. It's honestly an industry that I will admit I do not know enough about. I think things have to be reusable. You have to figure out how to make things maybe like both reusable and customizable. I'm curious, what are some of like the unique challenges that you've come across, maybe things that you wouldn't have expected getting into?
yeah. So this is something that I think is really an interesting it's a really interesting question to ask. And I think about it a lot. I'm still working on kind of the right words to use to frame it, the right understanding. But like one of the things that I perceive very strongly is that it's a different kind of market, right? Like if you imagine something that's sort of a direct to consumer product, where like I as a user could choose to adopt this product and spend my money on it, or I could choose not to, right? Or uh, there's a marketplace like eBay or something where I could choose to go there as a buyer, or I could choose not to. I could choose to go there as a seller, I could choose not to. Like with governments, the the choice is just it's constrained because I don't have a choice to pay my taxes. I have to. And if the municipality to whom I am paying my taxes uses a provider for online payments and I want to pay online, I have to use that provider, right? There's like um, my individual autonomy as kind of an end user or what we call a constituent user, as opposed to an agency user who's a person in the treasury
Mhm.
office, et cetera. I don't have as much agency as I do in other kinds of online interactions. So we have this really interesting, like two-sided dynamic where kind of officially at PayIt, like our clients are the agencies who sign the contract with PayIt to offer, the tax payment, et cetera, services for their agency. But we're also accountable to our constituents. And we have to be more accountable than a lot of other providers because the demographics, the accessibility is so important, right? Like we have to be available to everybody because the constituents of government are everybody, like by definition. And so it's really interesting the sort of back and forth dynamic between, well, the agency user wants this, but like we are able to provide this, like what's out of the box, what's custom. That's a balance that in my position, I tend to be more on the data and the infrastructure side. I have not been so close to that kind of like product development, but there's a tension there, right? Because the agency wants what they want, and a lot of times we can provide that out of the box. A lot of times we can configure something to implement that. Sometimes we can't, and like balancing that's really hard. It's not a marketplace where you're kind of free as a seller or a buyer to come and go, but it's also not sort of like a consumer business. It's this separate thing that I don't know how to describe, but it's we've had some interesting experiences. In my earlier days at PayIt, I was closer to kind of the integration piece, and I was doing more like client relationship work or client communication work. And you'd have really funny interactions with government sometimes where they don't expect the speed at which kind of a modern kind of cloud native business can deliver. And so I remember one interchange I had with a state client, and we had said like, okay, we've deployed the application into our staging environment so you can interact with it, and you can do XYZ, but you can't do ABC yet. And they were like, hold on, we just submitted the order to purchase the phones we're going to use to test the app. Like, we're not going to be able to look at it for at least 6 weeks. It's like, oh, well, when you're ready, it'll be here, and like, it's definitely been the case that the earlier PayIt offerings were much more sort of custom and bespoke to an individual client. And then as you build out multiple integrations for the same kind of vertical, be it property tax or citations, payments, et cetera, you gain an understanding of like, okay, this is the part that they have in common. This is the part that's different. And you can sort of better position yourself to make configurable the things that are different, and kind of come to the table saying, we can pull these levers and get you up and running very quickly with configuration and not need custom code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that duality that we often face as software developers, I think rings true in any field that I've ever been in. How much of your code should you abstract out? How much of it should you desire to make reusable? But also balancing needing to deliver things on time and making tough choices sometimes about areas where it is hard coded, and senior developers will often say like, oh well, you're repeating yourself, you're violating dry. And it's like, well, if I'm going to be doing it for a good reason, if there's not a justifiable rationale to be able to create classes and subclasses and factories and interfaces, I'm probably better off spending my time, which is honestly the organization's money, doing something that has a higher return of investment. And so I can definitely, at least in the applications that I've written, appreciate the times when I've like over engineered something. The classic example that I always go back to is one of the architects I worked with really early on in my career. He was traveling over in France, and in France, I don't remember which brand it is, and I don't think I would name them even if I did anyway, but they over engineered their parking brake to where there was no explicit parking brake on the device, on the car. It would infer from the usage of the brake when the driver wanted to activate the parking brake, which, I mean, sounds good in theory. And it was probably a massive feat of engineering to get through.
Yeah.
But when he came to a stop because he was at a stoplight and he let off the brake, the parking brake stayed activated. So he was like, uh-oh. And he's got some angry French drivers, like smoking some cigs, yelling at him in like French, probably some obscenities, you stupid American. So what he did was, all right, I know this thing has been engineered to divine my intentions, so I'm going to turn the car off. I'm going to open up the door. I'm going to get out. I'm going to walk around the car. I'm going to come back in. I'm going to turn it on again. I'm going to press the brake up, and sure enough, it worked. It's we as engineers sometimes will try to over-engineer things. So it's always good to hear that other people are going through the same experiences.
Well, and like, one of the things about, so like, I've had a very long tenure at PayIt. I'm the longest tenured engineer here. And one of the things that has allowed me to see is the entire life cycle of an application, which I think is just fascinating. So there's like, we have a backend application that I helped author in fall of 2016 that has been serving property tax and utility and water bill data in our platform through certain kinds of integrations for 7 years now, 7.5 years. We're actively deprecating it in favor of a sort of more modern PayIt way to do it. And it's fascinating to watch something that you like helped bring into existence, thinking about, gee, this is going to be really reusable, and end up like, actually, we've scaled beyond its reuse. We've come to understand reusability differently, because this particular service, it had reusability, assuming that you had like an account and a bill that fits some understanding of what an account and a bill looked like. And within a narrow scope of reusability, it worked fine and let us, do some things more quickly. But like, as our platform has grown, that distinction has like ceased to become so critical. We used to be built around the idea of something that you could do through PayIt, had an account and had a bill. But we've expanded into citations where there's not an account and a bill relationship. We've expanded into sort of miscellaneous payments, other kinds of offerings. And there are things that now are like coupled to the idea of an account and bill that we really want to be split out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I've really come around to like the car mechanics, in my experience, have a really great slogan, which is like, you could borrow a tool 2 times, then you need to buy it, And so it's like, your comment on, I'll make this reusable, like, well, until you have actually needed to reuse it, you don't know that you actually have a need to make it reusable. Like, I come down on the like, code is a liability, write as little as you can, and use loose coupling to the extent you can. So when you do discover, hey, that thing I wrote should have been in a reusable way, it's like easy to abstract it out, but don't do it in the moment. That work is often wasted in my experience.
Agreed. That's one of the things I always like to teach my junior engineers that I'm mentoring. I think you also in the municipality industry have a unique perspective because you probably yourself use the software that you have written. I make software for nurses. I make software for clinical call center agents. I make software for farmers. I make software for, God, the list goes on, technicians on substations for the electrical grid. I can do many things in my life, but I am none of those people. Whereas, to your point, everyone's got to pay their taxes, especially the, Johnson County where I live.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if there's been any insights that the team has sort of uncovered, have been like, well, the stakeholder says this, but like, I pay my taxes. I know that that's not going to work very well.
Yes and no. I don't think I'm super close to some of those conversations. But there definitely have been instances where you want to have somebody with like boots on the ground in the municipality. It's like, hey, because, and this is not intended in any way critical of our agency partners, but like, sometimes they'll tell us this is how the business process works, and the constituent experience doesn't match that. you you know and so, like, one of the things we run into is sometimes our agency users sometimes they own and operate their own system of record that we integrate with. Sometimes there's a third party, like an API, where they are using, kind of a citations API provider that we integrate with. And sometimes the like discussion of the business rules, where we're working against the API, sometimes the agency user is learning about their own system from the questions that we're asking about, like, can this ever be null? Can this, every citation has a court date. Well, then you find one that doesn't, and they're like, oh, I guess not everyone has a court date. So that's always sort of fun too, when you get to collaborate with the client on learning something.
That's one of the things that I honestly love about software is like the thought partnership, the mutual discovery.
I will say though, when we because the first year and a half or so that I was at PayIt, we were exclusively working with kind of non-local clients, right? We were doing City of St. Louis, City of Grand Rapids, but once we launched Kansas City, Kansas property taxes with unified government, and I could tell people, hey, do you live in Johnson County, and do you pay your property taxes with this app called, My Whitekup? And they're like, yeah. And I could say, that's us. Then they'd say, it made it easier to talk about. And if you hear my dogs crashing in the background, I apologize. they love to sit at this windowsill and look down onto the sidewalk and get upset.
Imagine loving some dogs. So no, okay, we've covered a lot of ground. I'm curious to kind of wrap it up. What advice do you have for, people that maybe come from non-traditional backgrounds? What are some of the things that you wish someone would have told you before you embarked on this journey of, the playing with ones and zeros essentially for a living?
Yeah. So one of one of the things that I think has been really key for me is like a non-traditional background can be way more useful than people expect it to be. Not that I ever really had like people really kind of being critical to my face or anything, but you get people who are like, oh, like you came into software from linguistics. Like that sounds like it's really hard. And like actually, like data-driven linguistics is like making sense of large, messy systems that we don't understand. And like so are distributed software systems, and like a lot of the linguistics background really carries over well because it's like, okay, I'm entering a new community. Like, what are the speech norms? What are the patterns? What are the things that carry meaning? Right? Like that's what my linguistics training is all about. And so to come in and say, oh, the convention here for Java is to do X, and for JavaScript it's to do Y. Like you can kind of see things, you can pick up on them. You have good communication skills. Like, so like people with non-traditional backgrounds, obviously there's like strength, there's benefits and disadvantages, but the communication skills, the ability to like break down a problem and work through it, so much of that stuff is not specific to software engineering as a discipline. And you can come to it from another background and be very, very useful. The other big thing for me is like, and I don't have a, like, I wish I had a pithier way to say this, but like there's so much more than just the work. Like, we kind of think about, as if you're not a computer programmer, you think about, oh, you're sitting at your keyboard and you're typing code, and like that's a small part of what you do. And becoming good at writing code is great. It's important. But like knowing what code to write and what not to write, and what's the priority and what's not the priority, and which of the things you're working on are contributing to what business outcomes is like also critically important. And if you're doing a good job but you're working on the wrong thing, you're not going to have as much success as if you do a mediocre job but you're working on the right thing. And so the like investing in my own processes around things like note taking and local development environment, and like building good processes for myself to kind of jump in and be productive somewhere. And okay, how do I run the tests is like, first thing. And I've never regretted spending time on like making my own processes good for me and having a system about them.
Absolutely. That's it's really good advice. So if people want to learn more about you, learn more about your work, what social networks are you most active on? Do you still have a Zanga? I don't know. Maybe some. I think
Sure
George R. R.
ever
Martin
had
does
Zynga.
for some reason.
He definitely has a Tumblr. I never had one of those either. Honestly, these days I'm mostly on LinkedIn. I have a Mastodon account. I have my own little Mastodon server with just me on it. LinkedIn is most of my social media these days, though. That's the best place to find me. I post publicly on there occasionally. I'm trying to cultivate more of like a writing in public habit, and the LinkedIn posts are like a low effort, low stakes way for me to start that.
Yeah, I think it was Jerry Seinfeld. His recommendation is just write something every single day. And I don't know what it is about going around the sun once, but as soon as you do something every single day throughout the course of our revolution around the sun, by the time you get back to where you started, usually you're a little bit better. Just got to pay the tax. Got to pay the hours.
There's a wonderful writer on Twitter who I followed, and I can't remember his name at the time of saying this, but he has this motto about writing, which is basically persist, don't quit.
Yep.
And he's like, if you do something every day long enough, you'll find that you suddenly are really good at it and have a really good process. Like you just have to do it, and like the process will emerge for you. And so I'm like trying to take that to heart.
Like I
hasn't happened yet. I haven't felt like I've crossed that boundary, but
when you cross that Rubicon, I'll let you know. So Matt, it was real, dude. Thank you very much for the time today.
Thank you so much, Zach. It's been great.
And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening. We'll catch you in the future.